The night beckons.
Welcome back to the Undead Laboratory. Today we're going to be making a cannon that fires a bit of smoke. A bit of housekeeping before we start. In today's video, we're going to talk about the theory behind the mechanisms before we get into the build. Additionally, during the course of the video, I will pause and include areas where I think I could have made the build more effective as an alternative, but as a warning, it is untested. The first mechanism used in this build is a bellows. A bellows is essentially a bag you inflate with air and compress to push air out in a direction. Bellows can use a one-way valve to improve efficiency. There are some cool simple methods, but we aren't going to worry about that today. For simplicity, our bellows consists of a garbage bag, plywood, and some tape or glue. The next mechanism, if you can call it that, is essentially turning rotational motion into linear motion. By putting a sufficiently long arm on our drive shaft, we can get the exact amount of linear motion. This mechanism is going to be used to expand our bellows and inflate it. Therefore, we want an arm that is half the length of the bellows when it goes from deflated to inflated. The reason we want half is that as the arm turns, when it goes from the closest point to the furthest point, it is twice its length. The next mechanism, for all intents and purposes, is a cam. A cam also turns rotational motion into linear motion, but it does it in a very interesting way. Most of the time, a cam looks like this and is used in a car. But the beauty of it is that it doesn't always cause motion, and it is timed to be effective at certain times. In our application, it's going to look a little bit different, but it's going to work very similarly. The final mechanism we're going to look at is an over-center mechanism. Most over-center mechanisms are used in latches. By having a force of a latch go past the rotational point, you cause a mechanism to keep itself locked in place, and with a small amount of force you can release it. Again, our application will be slightly different, but for the main part the mechanism will stay the same. For the cannon itself, there are many guides, and a lot use the same material, but the guide I liked was by Cassie Jensen. She made a post on the Pirate Halloween decorating group on Facebook that looked absolutely fantastic. And while mine looked like absolute dog water, it has potential to look phenomenal. Now that we are through the housekeeping, let's get to the build. First, we're going to need some lumber, and the majority of it is 2x4. We're going to need a few different lengths. We're going to need 2 of each of these. We're going to need 30-inch lengths, 24-inch lengths, 18-inch lengths, 12-inch lengths, and finally 5 11-inch lengths. Using the flattest surface available, we're going to use 2 of the 30-inch lengths and 2 of the 11-inch lengths, and we're going to make a rectangle. This is going to be the bottom base. A quick note here, if you're going to make a cannon more powerful, you're going to want to make 2 of these instead to give you a little more height. This gives you extra space for the bellows. I will make reference to the other areas where this height would be important. Next, we're going to make a similar rectangle, but only using the 24-inch and 11-inch sections. For the 18-inch section, we're only going to be using a single 11-inch, so we're going to be making a C shape instead. The 12-inch long sections aren't actually going to be connected. They're just going to sit on top of the 18-inch sections. The original design used PVC that goes into the 12-inch sections. I didn't have PVC available, so I skipped that part, but if you want to do it, find a piece of PVC that looks right to you. The guide calls out 2-inch PVC, so that's a good place to start. If you decide to do it, make sure you make the appropriate cuts in the 12-inch sections to seat the PVC. That is all we're going to need for the base of the cannon. If you wish to do any sanding, painting, or staining, this is the time to do it. Next, we're going to make the wheels. I had leftover fence boards for this, and fence boards are pretty wide. But as an alternative, you can screw 2 pieces of 2x4 together to make a wheel instead. Here I used excess 1x2 that I had lying around to make the axle. While it can be used, a better solution is to use a PVC pipe instead. That way you can put screws on either side of the wheel and allow them to spin freely. Whichever method you decide to use, I recommend 3 inches on either side of the cannon. With 11-inch cross members and 3 inches of 2x4 on the sides, I recommend a 20-inch long axle. You might notice something here, and it is something we will get into later. What is important is that you set the axle far enough back that you have enough access that you'll be able to drive a drill in later. Cut the wheels out and attach them to the bottom of the base. When I did this build, I didn't know how the motor was going to work, so I left it for last, but you don't have to. For this, I recommend a wiper motor, and I also highly recommend a speed controller, but it isn't necessary. For mounting, I like to use fence post mounts, but don't buy them on Amazon. They're much cheaper if you go to a big box home improvement store. For the spindle, I went with a 2-inch long bolt with 2 washers, some spacers, a nut threaded all the way to the end, and a locking nut. The arm itself is made from a mending plate that was a good width. The plate was cut to length and the holes needed were drilled. And finally, the plate was bent to clear obstacles. The motor is going to be mounted to the back bottom of the second largest rectangle of the base. We're going to start working on the actual mechanism that gives a cannon its firepower. For this, we will need 2 pieces of plywood. More specifically, we need one piece that is 24 inches long and another that is 20 inches long. Both need to be 10.5 inches wide. If you can get a single piece of plywood that is 24 inch by 24 inch, you only need one piece and you're going to cut it down to size. This plywood was left over from last year and is only 5mm thick, which is the thinnest I could find, so don't be afraid to get thin pieces. When you stack the base of the cannon, you'll notice that there is an extra cross member on the front. Our 24-inch long plywood is going to span from the front to the back diagonally, and this is what we want. With it on top, we want to see how large of a slot we can cut from front to back. The hole I decided on and marked was 20 inches long and is 3 inches wide. The length of the slot is determined by how much space you have from front to back, and the width is determined by the size of the pipe internal of the cannon. With our sizes decided, we can cut the appropriate openings in the plywood. The concrete tube and the PVC pipe need a matching slot, so the best approach is to place a concrete tube on the base and see what looks best before making your cut. Make sure the cut in the PVC lines up with the concrete tube. With all 3 cuts made, we can start to finalize the barrel of the cannon. Make the tube and the pipe concentric with each other with whichever method you decide to use, but when you do this, make sure that the slots line up. At this point, I recommend using wood filler, sanding, and painting the barrel inside and out. For the back of the cannon, we're going to be using bowls of different sizes. It was simply a matter of sanding, priming, and painting, and finally hot gluing it all together. While those pieces dry, we can work on the bellows. We're going to need an inlet for the fog to come in. I used a shop vac here with an attachment, so I simply made a hole large enough for the hose to go in but not the attachment. For the bellows, we're going to need a few things. This is going to need several hinges, and the size we want is something that will attach to a piece of 1x2. In total, we will need 5 of them. To connect the plywood together, we're going to make sure that the long top piece has space to attach to the base, so we don't want the hinges to be all the way on the edge. I found it best to use nuts, bolts, and washers here to not have exposed screws. Next, we're going to make the over center mechanism. The length of our 1x2 is going to be determined by how much space we have internal of the base. As our bellows is only 2 pieces of 2x4 tall, and 2x4 is actually only 3.5 inches tall and not 4, we're looking at about 7 inches. As you can see, I just marked the length of the base itself, so you can go ahead and just do that if you want. If you're going to make the mechanism taller, make sure you include the extra space you want here. To make this mechanism work, we do need to cut this into 2 equally long sections. For placement, I placed a screw between the 1x2s to give it a little extra space and make sure that it's over-centered. Quick pause, I later found that this space was a little too much and made activation difficult. You want the movement of the over-center to be enough but not too much. I did come up with a good solution here. If you drill a screw into place right here, you can adjust the screw by moving it in and out, and this will adjust how much you need to activate. To actually assemble our over-center mechanism, we're going to use the hinges on the ends on one side and the hinges that connect the 2 together on the other. As we don't have much space to work with in here, we're going to need to use nuts and bolts to attach our system to our bellows. Now, when we inflate our bellows, it'll lock in place until we're ready to deflate. We can finally start work on the last part of the bellows. The first thing we need to do here is make a hole in the garbage bag that will line up with the hole we cut in the bottom of the bellows earlier. For reference, I made the bottom of the bag line up with the center line of the plywood. Tape the shop vac attachment to the bag to make sure they do not separate, or the hole in the bag doesn't get any bigger. With the attachment secured, we're going to attach the bag to the plywood. Start by attaching the bottom middle of the bag where the sides of the bag meet to the center line of the plywood. For this, I used hot glue. Once the center is done, pull the sides of the bag towards the edge of the plywood. You can use hot glue here as well, but I used tape. For the side with the over-center mechanism, make sure you leave enough space for it to move. With the bottom secured, we can work on the top. Make sure the bellows is in the inflated position, and then attach the bag to the top piece of the plywood, but make sure you give a little bit of slack. We want to make sure there's enough of the bag protruding out of the top of the plywood to be able to attach the Canon, so if you think it's going to be tight, consider a larger bag. With our bellows complete, we can finally come back to a reference I made earlier regarding the axle. We need to be able to pull on the bellows to expand it, and the way we're going to do that is by installing a pulley on the axle, but we need it to line up with the over-center mechanism. There are two things we will need to do here before the bellows can be installed. The first is we need a method to be able to pull the bellows shut. For this, I drilled a hole off-center of the over-center mechanism. Instead of a hole, a screw or a bolt would work better. I ran a pair of rubber bands through the hole and used a carabiner to keep it from coming out. On the top of the Canon, we're going to install a screw to keep the tension on the rubber bands, so make sure these line up. The last thing we need to do is to run our mechanism cables. I used fishing line here, but that isn't necessary. A bit of ingenuity led me to this, but if you attach the inflation line to the hinge of the over-center mechanism, it will pull the bellows out to inflate it and lock the over-center mechanism. If you don't do it this way and you just attach it to the bottom of the bellows, you run the risk of the over-center mechanism not activating. The second line should be attached to the same hinge but pull in the opposite direction to deflate the bellows. The inflation line should run towards the front of the Canon, around the plywood and down towards the pulley, and then towards the back of the Canon. The deflation line should run off the side of the bellows, and should just go to the bottom. We'll deal with this in a minute. With everything ready, we're going to screw the top of the bellows to the base of the Canon. Now we can run the cables to the motor. The inflation line should run around the pulley and to the spindle we made on the wiper motor earlier. Be sure to attach it in between the two washers. For the tension, we want the bellows to be in the inflated position and the motor to be almost at its furthest point. We want to make sure the bellows is fully inflated, and we don't want to lose tension when we make our knots. With the deflation line in hand, make sure to run the motor a few times to make sure the over-center mechanism is activating. If it isn't, you likely need a bit more tension. Make sure you tug on the deflation line slightly after the bellows inflates, so the inflation line doesn't get tangled on the motor. When you're satisfied with the inflation, we're going to go back to work on the deflation line. For this, I used 2 eye bolts, but screws work just as well. The trick here is positioning where the line is going to be positioned. This determines when the Canon will activate. If you activate it too early, the inflation line will be put in tension and not allow the bellows to fully deflate. This line is a bit tricky to get right, as when you tie it, you need the over-center mechanism to be active, and if you tie it too tight, it will collapse. A bit of patience is key here. Run the mechanism a few times to make sure it is all working as intended. If you haven't done it yet, now is a good time to attach the hose to the attachment you made earlier. Place the Canon on the base, but on its side a bit so you can access the garbage bag from the base and the slots we made in the Canon. We want to tape the bag as best we can from the inside of the PVC. It is important that we take our time here and tape the bag as best as possible. Any holes will allow fog to get stuck on the outer tube of the Canon. My recommendation is to start from the front and work your way back, and use the back opening of the Canon to finish adding tape. When you're happy, center the Canon right side up and tape off the back of the Canon. We want to make sure that no fog escapes here. We can finally add the last touch to the Canon. We're going to hot glue the bowls to the back. And now we are ready to fire at will.
In the lab at the break of night, flashing lights, it's a ghostly sight. Beakers bubbling, a chilling sound. Creatures waking undead all around. Shadows moving cold and slow. Scientists lost in a deadly glow. Lifeless eyes in a wicked trance. Nightmares dance in a morbid dance. Under the laboratory, dark and cold, stories of the night here unfold. In the dark where the mad reside, fear and terror intertwined. Tools of horror, tools of dread, bringing life to the already dead. Broken souls stitched and sealed in this lab where secrets are revealed. Haunted whispers echoing wide, monsters born nowhere to hide. Darkness souls stitched and sealed in this lab where secrets are revealed.